Hi, I'm Gary Hamel, professor at the London Business School and director of the Management Lab. Welcome to my video blog, Gary Tells You Why. Today I want to talk about why change management. You've heard that phrase, change management? Well, I want to tell you why that is an oxymoron. Like airline food, business casual, strategic planning, anarchy rules, or male menopause. So change management is an oxymoron, and there's some kind of core ideas built into this notion of change management that I think are very dangerous and very unhelpful. First, there's the idea that change starts at the top, that some people have the right to initiate and manage change and others don't. And the problem with this is that, therefore, before any real change program can get started, it has to be endorsed by senior leaders. It needs a top-level sign-off. But the dilemma is that a lot of times leaders are the last to know. I mean, think about it. A problem or an opportunity typically has to be pretty big before it captures the scarce attention of leaders at the top of a large organization. I remember reading a wonderful story in Fortune magazine a few years back, obviously, but where some young team at Microsoft was watching what Google was doing with search and trying to get the attention of Microsoft's leadership team. And it took them several years to get their attention and say, watch out, this whole search thing is going to be big, by which time, of course, Microsoft is on the back foot and can't catch up. This is why when change starts at the top, almost by definition, it's going to be too little too late. And I would argue this is why most change programs are catch-up programs in disguise. And you can think about that. Look back at some of the big change initiatives in your own organization. How many of them are really about getting out in front, doing something fundamentally new, rather than catching up to somebody else? The second problem I have with the idea of change management is the notion that change rolls out, that it cascades downwards. Now, of course, the problem here is that often those in charge don't have a lot of incentives to challenge traditional practices. So this means that if change is always going to roll out, it's always going to be kind of incremental and relatively modest. In addition, when change is prescribed from above rather than kind of discovered and embraced from below, it's always going to feel like it's imposed on people. And conscripts are not very willing participants in the change process. When change rolls out, it also means that you have failed to harness a lot of the imagination and the creative potential of people on the front lines. It's interesting to me that in change programs, executives often talk about the need to get buy-in, but I can tell you buy-in doesn't come from a communication strategy. Buy-in comes from involvement, not slick packaging. Third problem, I think, with the idea of change management is the notion that change is engineered. Change management implies that there's some, change program that can be scripted out, beginning, middle, end, that it's like a large-scale construction project or an IT overhaul. But if change is to be truly transformational, if change is going to break new ground, by definition, it can't be entirely scripted, entirely predetermined in advance. So when change programs are engineered, the solution space is limited by what people can imagine and see at the outset of that change program. Another problem in change management is the idea that change is episodic. It's a change program. Most of us still think of change as some exceptional activity, something that interrupts long periods of stasis. We're still using Kurt Lewin's model of freeze, unfreeze, and refreeze. But today, anything that stays frozen for very long is going to be out of date and irrelevant. We don't need freeze and unfreeze. We kind of need permanent slush. Finally, and most dangerously, there's an assumption that people are against change. You've heard this. When I ask any senior leader, what's the most difficult thing in getting your change implemented? Invariably, the answer is people don't like to change. Now, I think that's mostly rubbish, and let me tell you why. We can do a little experiment, you and me, right now. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and at the end I want you to tell me if any of this is true for you. So a few questions. Have you changed jobs in the last 3 years, either inside your organization or maybe you moved to a new organization? Have you moved in the last 3 years? You moved to a new house, new city, new country. Have you changed spouses? This sometimes happens today. Have you gone back and learned a new skill? Have you gone to school, taken an online course? Have you taken a vacation in a new place? Or have you made, long overdue, but have you made the switch from PC to Mac? So just think about those questions. I'm guessing that at least one of those questions you answered yes, maybe to several of them. The fact is, as human beings, we are not against change. We are novelty addicts. We love to take vacations in new places, try a new fashion, read new books, play around with new ideas. So if people are against change, it's not really about us. It's about the change process itself. And I can understand. If you feel that change is imposed, if you feel it's coming behind the curve rather than in front of it, so it's more around sacrifice than it is around creating new opportunities, if you feel that in the change program, most of the pain is falling on lower parts of the organization, maybe the people who weren't asleep at the switch, yeah, you may have a problem with change. You may be against it. But let's not assume that people are not willing to change. I remember having a discussion about this in one of my classes at the London Business School. And a young woman at the back of the class raised her hand. She said, "Gary, if you want people to change, you have to make it safe for them." And I thought about that for a moment. There's another kid sitting almost next to her, and sitting beside him was a motorcycle helmet and a leather jacket. And so I asked this guy, I said, "You obviously rode your motorcycle into school today. Is that the safest way to get across London and into school?" And he said, "No, clearly no. I could have taken the bus or the tube or even walked. Motorcycle is not the safest way." So I said, "So why did you ride it?" He said, "Because it's fun." And I thought to myself, as human beings, we are willing to take all kinds of risks, right? We ski, we scuba dive, we ride motorcycles, we go mountain biking. Is the problem that you have to make change safe for people, or is the problem you have to make it exciting? And change is only exciting when you feel you're part of creating it, when you feel you have that chance to create new opportunity, when the world is filled with more promise than peril. But that's not how most change programs appear to people. So what's the alternative here? By the way, I should add that even most executives I meet are pretty frustrated with traditional change management programs, because they know if they're trying to get their organization to do something truly new and radical, real change is going to be very difficult to achieve, no matter how powerful they are. Let me give you an example. I'm old enough, not that you needed to worry about how old I am, you know it. I'm old enough to remember when Mikhail Gorbachev was running the Soviet Union. And Mikhail Gorbachev was a genuine transformative leader. He wanted glasnost and perestroika. He wanted openness and restructuring in the Soviet Union. He knew that it would fail if it didn't change faster. And yet, he struggled and struggled to get that change through. Because underneath them was a layer of apparatchiks, the nomenclatura, who were very comfortable with their positional power. They spent their careers climbing the old hierarchy in the Soviet Union. And they saw glasnost and perestroika as a threat to their prerogatives. And so any leader, if you're working down through just that next layer or two that really is invested in the past, it is very difficult to get them to change. They'll give you 100 reasons why the change can't work, or they'll simply smile and agree with you and then slow walk the reforms. So if you're even a leader and you want change to happen, you can't rely on the old top-down cascade model of change. Rather, you have to create a grassroots change program. You have to go to first level, second level associates and team members and say, "This is what I'm trying to do. Will you help me?" In other words, change has to become a social process. I believe that in the future, all truly effective change programs are going to be socially constructed. And kind of that hit me with real force a few years ago when I was reading an online blog. This was after Microsoft had missed a very important ship window for a new version of Windows. So they're months late. It cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars. And someone that I'm quite sure was an employee wrote a blog about this problem called Fire the Leadership Now. And I watched that blog over the next few days and weeks, and soon it had more than 300 comments, most of whom had to be people inside of Microsoft. The deep insights they had about people in the wrong roles, or teams that weren't connecting, or project goals that were changed too late in the development cycle, you could just tell that these people, A, were passionate about their company, they loved their company, but they were also very frustrated. So I read through these 300 and some comments. Two things struck me. First of all, it was one of the most sophisticated analyses of organizational performance I had ever seen. Better than anything I would have seen from a consultant. These are people in the trenches who cared, and you could see clear consensus and patterns emerging over all these comments. The second thing that struck me, about every other person posting said, "Thank goodness there's someplace where we can talk about this." Problem was, that someplace was outside the firewall. And the reason it was outside the firewall was inside. There was no platform, neither was it legitimate to have these kinds of conversations. We have to change that. If you want to build an organization that's more innovative or more adaptable or more customer-centric, whatever, you start with frontline users. Right? That's the core principle of design thinking. Start with the users. And in a large company, the users are the people who every day are at the front lines delivering value, interfacing with customers. And if you want change, you start the conversation with them. And guess what? When a few people are courageous to stand up and say, this is a problem, this we need to change, that courage starts to proliferate. They give permission to other people to be courageous. And when you have 100 or 1,000 people saying, this is a problem, this needs to change, there is no single person anymore who can stand in the way of that. That becomes its own movement. And you can trust people. You can trust them to be activists, not anarchists. You can trust them because they want what's best for their colleagues, their customers, and the company. You can trust them with that responsibility. So we need to change the way we change in organizations, and it's going to start by thinking of change not as something that rolls down, but something that rolls up, that exploits and harnesses the collective wisdom of everyone in the organization.